Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm a late diagnosed autistic human being from France and I make videos about my own experience as a late diagnosed autistic person. It's 7 a.m. right now. I have really been struggling with sleep lately, which I think is because of, burnout, but also Christmas is fast approaching and that stresses me out. I've been struggling to fall asleep and then waking up multiple times during the night, and then sometimes it takes me a couple hours to go back to sleep. And well, this time around I woke up around 5 and couldn't go back to sleep no matter how hard I tried, so I thought I might as well get up. I'm gonna speak kind of quietly because I don't want to wake up my partner who's still asleep. But I've been meaning to film a video for a little while, and so I thought this is the perfect opportunity. I'm alone, it's quiet, still dark. I don't have anything better to do, so I'm sorry if the Christmas tree lights are a bit bright for your eyes. Feel free to look away from the screen. So today is December 11th, I believe. Only a couple weeks left until Christmas. No matter how much I love Christmas, it's my favorite time of the year. As a child, I very much had a special interest in it, like a seasonal special interest. It's always been something I love, but this year, being in burnout, which I've been talking about at length on my channel for the past 8 months or so, Christmas with family, how can I put it? It's not something I'm terribly looking forward to. Family gatherings are always a struggle for me, even when I'm not in burnout. And I still enjoy them, don't get me wrong. But, if you're autistic, And when I say family gatherings, it's me, my partner, and my in-laws. That's it. I don't have a big family or anything like that. Even back when I was still in touch with my biological family, Christmases were just spent with my parents, my great aunt, and when I was younger, my maternal grandparents, and that was it. So, it was never a big thing. New Year's could be a bit bigger with like family, friends, and stuff, but it's nothing compared to the Christmases with more than 15 people, like, no, I've never experienced that. I come from a very small family. No matter how much I love Christmas and I enjoy spending time with family, it's taxing. It's just a lot. Socializing in general is a struggle, masking, and when your family stays for a while and you have to mask every single day and you basically don't get a day off, and on top of that there's a lot happening sensory wise. The gift giving, which I love making gifts for other people. It's one of my favorite parts of Christmas is finding gifts for people, and not necessarily like buying cheap junk that they're gonna throw away in the trash. Like, I try to find gifts that are very personal, and it's not necessarily expensive stuff because I don't have a lot of money and that's not really where my values lie, but just stuff that I know that like will surprise them in a good way and then they'll want to keep and cherish. Getting gifts myself though is another story. I didn't mind it as much when I was a kid. I hear a lot of autistic people on social media talk about the struggle with autistic kids opening gifts on Christmas Day. That's not something I struggled with. But as an adult, I guess the pressure to perform socially is more intense. People are a lot more forgiving with kids, is what I've found out over the years. It goes hand in hand with not liking to be perceived, and when you're opening gifts in front of someone, like, you're very much being perceived. I posted a short the other day about that. It was a clip from my 25th birthday where I was opening a gift. I was saying how I was masking really, really hard and it was still not enough. And when I looked back at myself afterwards, I was like, I couldn't believe the difference between how much I thought I expressed on my face and what I actually expressed on my face, which was not much. So yeah, opening gifts in front of people is a performance. You have to make sure that you look happy, excited, grateful, blah blah blah, because you don't want to hurt their feelings. It's a whole thing. It's exhausting. But I mean, the gift ceremony, it's only one time. It's fine. What bothers me the most is like the whole duration of the holidays. Since my in-laws live in a different country, they live in Switzerland, we live in France, we used to live in England before that. They usually are the one coming to us for the holidays. We'll spend the actual Christmas Eve and Christmas Day separately. I do it with my partner, they do it on their own, and then they visit my father-in-law's family on Christmas Day, usually, or Boxing Day, and then usually on the 26th or 27th they travel to us, and then they stay for about 10 days usually. And so we do Christmas together on the 27th, 28th, and then we do New Year's obviously on the 31st of December. And that's how we do it every year. And it's always a little stressful. I talked about how I had meltdowns during past Christmases before I was diagnosed. It's just for me, it's the relentless, like having people in your home for 10 days straight is a lot for most autistic people. Even if like they could be the closest people in the world, the dearest people in the world to you, it's still a lot because you still have to perform socially every single day. Which is why this year I already knew I was in burnout, or I already knew I was gonna struggle, so we decided that they were gonna spend one night away. My partner and my in-laws will go to a town nearby that they wanted to visit, and they're gonna stay there overnight. It's kind of a compromise that we came up with to make sure that I get sort of a break and it's not just 10 days straight, and that way I'll get a couple days and one night where I get to be on my own. I get that alone time to recharge, and that's very important to me. Ideally though, with the way I'm feeling right now, 2 weeks ahead, if I could, I would say let's cancel everything and just do Christmas together, my partner and I, just the two of us. That would be my dream right now. Again, nothing against my in-laws. I'm happy to see them, looking forward to it, can't wait for them to open their gifts. But my resources are so limited still because of burnout that being alive right now is kind of a struggle. If you've ever been in autistic burnout, I was basically in bed for 2 to 3 weeks in November. Then I had kind of an increase in my energy levels, and so I've been out of bed and I've been a little more active, but still very much pacing myself because I'm very far from being back to my normal energy levels. Honestly, beyond the fatigue, right now the main struggle is dysregulation, my nervous system being dysregulated. And that's something I actually wanted to touch on as well, because I actually had a kind of a revelation. I've been watching a channel called Charlie something. I'll put it somewhere on the screen or in the description. And they make really great shorts and long videos as well, but I've been mostly watching their shorts, where they talk about being dysregulated and how to regulate your nervous system as a neurodivergent person. They're ADHD themselves. I'm sorry about my cat meowing in the background. He wants to go outside, but I don't let him outside when it's dark and the sun hasn't come up yet, so he's gonna have to wait, but he's not happy about it. And in one of their shorts, they were saying how for a long time they were treating dysregulation or overstimulation as fatigue, and they were using, rest to kind of recover from it until they realized that actually what they were dealing with was nervous system dysregulation, and now they have different strategies for it. And they were giving as an example feeling kind of out of breath. I apologize if I'm confusing them with someone else, or if it's just I'm mixing things up in my head. It's the brain fog. That's something I heard recently, was that feeling of being out of breath, and how, as autistic people, we're often dysregulated, but until we're diagnosed, we don't know it's nervous system dysregulation, and so we think, or that we're overstimulated, and so we think we're anxious or we're tired, and that's how we approach it, and the strategies don't necessarily work because that's not what you're actually dealing with. And that just clicks in my brain. Like, I had a light bulb moment. It's not something that's totally new. It's something I had kind of figured out already. You know how sometimes, maybe that's just me, sometimes you know something, but it hasn't like fully clicked for you internally. Does that make any sense? I don't know. I already knew that there were probably times in my life when I was dysregulated, overstimulated, and I treated it as anxiety or whatever. It's been a year since I figured out I'm autistic, and it's been 10 months since I was diagnosed, and I feel like it took me such a long time to actually figure out what overstimulation looks like for me. It's such a long self-discovery journey after you get your diagnosis. It's not instantly like, oh yeah, I know everything about myself and then I can, no. It's like it takes months. It's gonna take years, probably. And so I had a realization the other day, because I was thinking specifically about those moments when I felt like I had what I called anxiety. This feeling of being out of breath and stuff I've had since childhood. I went to my family doctor when I was in secondary school, somewhere around 12 probably, because I thought I had asthma, because I struggled to breathe sometimes, and the only condition related to breathing that I knew of at the time, having asthmatic people in my family, was asthma, and so I thought that must be what I have. So I went to the GP, and like my lungs were fine, everything was fine. And so he was like, is there anything that triggers these episodes and stuff? I was like, it's when I've been arguing with mom and stuff. And so he was kind of like, try not to argue with your mom, whatever, like completely oblivious or not wanting to see what was obviously in front of his eyes, which was abuse. But that's a problem for another day. And so he kind of brushed it off as like, oh, you're just stressed, like a 12-year-old having like what he thought were panic attacks at the time, just brushed it off like it's fine, it's no big deal. And so that's kind of what I thought basically for the next 15 years. Anytime I had those things where I struggled to breathe, and sometimes it would last weeks on end, weeks, where I felt like I was constantly out of breath. And like, there's nothing wrong with me medically. So I always knew it was mental health related, At the same time, I felt kind of confused because I couldn't really relate to anxiety or how people described what being anxious felt like. I would do meditations and things like that, watch videos for anxious people, and it was always about like anxious thoughts and so, because in those moments, I'm not saying I don't experience anxiety ever. I do. I'm a very anxious person. But in those specific moments that I'm talking about, I didn't necessarily experience the anxious thoughts. So I thought, oh, I must have some sort of physical manifestation of anxiety, but it's not mental. But like, that was something that didn't quite line up, for me. And there were times when, I would be in a restaurant and I would get that feeling like I was gonna suffocate and I needed to escape that environment. And I thought, like, why am I so anxious? There's no reason for me to feel anxious. I put it on account of me being socially anxious. Actually, what it was I was overstimulated, probably from the background noise, everything, like all the people, and I was just overstimulated. And I was treating it as anxiety, but I wasn't really anxious, and it makes so much sense to me now. And there was another example specifically that came to mind. I think I must have talked about it in past videos where I think it was in 2023, summer of 2023, shortly before I started my autism diagnosis journey. My in-laws were staying with us. Anytime I talk about socializing, usually it involves my in-laws in one way or another. So my in-laws were staying with us, and usually, like I said, when they stay with us, it's usually for a week to 10 days because they come from another country, they can't visit us very often, so they gotta make it count. At the time, I was still heavily masked, so I would force myself to be present every minute of every day and every evening because it's rude to leave your guests, to abandon your guests. And I knew that I wasn't being perceived well whenever I vanished. So I would force myself to stay, to be present. I would, of course, repress my stimming because I didn't want to be seen as weird or annoying. Masking, basically. Not listening to my own needs, uh, always exaggerating facial expressions and forcing conversations that I didn't want to have, forcing eye contact, the whole thing, the whole thing. On the last day before they left, I reached a breaking point. I must have been masking more than usual, or I had less capacity. I mean, I was already getting, like, I've been talking about how I've had like chronic burnout. It's been a long way coming, I probably already didn't really have the capacity for that kind of thing as much as I did when I was younger. And so on the last day, I reached my limit. And I remember I was sitting on the couch next to my mother-in-law. We were all watching a movie. It was supposed to be chill. It wasn't a particularly stressful movie. I already knew the movie. Like, it was cool. It was the last day and stuff. And I was sitting on that couch, sitting very still, not stimming because I didn't want to be annoying to my mother-in-law. And a lot of my stimming involves like whole body movements, like rocking, swaying, shaking my leg, clenching my muscles, like things that are like you're gonna feel it if you're sitting next to me. Things that I don't mask nearly as much anymore, but at the time I very much did. So I was sitting very still, and I felt like that pressure building inside of me, and I couldn't breathe, and I had to leave the room. And like I pretended that I was gonna make myself a cup of tea or whatever. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I went up to my room, and I didn't come back at all until the following morning. Like I left. I didn't even say anything. I just left. I think my partner came to see me. I told him, I'm like, I didn't have the words obviously at the time. Now I would be like, I'm overstimulated. At the time I was like, I'm feeling very anxious. And so he told my in-laws, and then I still like sent them a WhatsApp message because I felt guilty. I was apologizing, blah blah blah. And I thought I was having a freaking panic attack because I couldn't breathe. And then I had like weird symptoms where I felt like I was heating up from the inside, and I felt nauseous, and I thought I was gonna throw up, like symptoms that could be associated with anxiety, except I didn't feel mentally anxious. I didn't have anxious thoughts. It was just the culmination of having masked heavily every single day for a week. that just my mental capacity, I just didn't have any capacity to keep going any longer. And it took me several hours to finally calm down or like regulate again, you know. And like the next morning, I remember having absolutely no resources left to make conversation, make faces. I remember not uttering a word, basically, more or less, struggling to look people in the eye, not making any facial expressions. And I remember my mother-in-law being like looking at me being so perplexed and worried. We took them to the station. I remember when they left, she was like, "I hope you'll get well soon" and stuff. Like I was at the time, I was still framing it as I'm very anxious, and I'm like, this wasn't anxiety. I was just super overstimulated and dysregulated from a week of socializing too much. And I had reached my limit. I really had. And there were other times when I had meltdown. I had like after Christmas one year, I had a meltdown on the day that they left. Like I usually towards the end is when I'm like, all right, I can't take this anymore, and like I'll have some kind of meltdown or whatever. And now I'm like, it's so clear to me that it's my nervous system is dysregulated. I'm like my mental capacity is completely drained. I can't keep going, you know? And it was so liberating to realize that. It was very much like an aha moment, but also it made me feel very sad for past me because I felt very guilty at the time. I felt very bad about myself. I felt like an utter failure. And now I have a lot of compassion for myself because now I know what was going on. I'm like, man, that was a lot. And I also feel very angry. Not necessarily like at anyone in particular because obviously they didn't know. They didn't know any more than I did. But just I'm angry at the injustice of it all, you know? People often say when you get your autism diagnosis, it takes a while to process all the emotions, the grief, the anger, and stuff. And I thought those emotions were gonna come right away, but you know, with delayed processing and stuff, I feel like I've really been in touch with those emotions only like these past few months. It's been intense. Feeling angry because, especially with the burnout that I'm in, knowing that this could have been avoided, easily avoided, had I been diagnosed earlier, had I been surrounded by like educated, well informed professionals who were good at what they were doing in a country that didn't like turn a blind eye to neurodiversity and instead tried to find like euphemisms and socially acceptable labels like HPI, HPI, I said that weird, which is like high intellectual potential. It only exists in France and surrounding French speaking countries. It's basically the socially acceptable equivalent of autism. But it sounds nicer than saying autism. So they'd rather give that diagnosis, even though it literally doesn't help, and there's no support given. There's already not a lot of support given when you're autistic, but like even less when you're given that diagnosis. You know, this is the country I grew up in where they'd rather just invent a whole new label that looks pretty instead of fighting to destroy the stigma around the already existing label. And so there's a lot of anger around that and being like, I grew up surrounded by incompetent, selfish adults who were cruel for the most part. And I was like bullied by basically every parent of every child I was friends with at one point or another. And all the health professionals, all the teachers either bullied me or just ignored me when I was like clearly in distress. And I'm not even talking about my own family, obviously, which was the biggest neglect of them all. But you know, like there's a lot of anger around that because I'm like, well, had they done their job properly, had they cared a little bit, I would have been diagnosed earlier And I might not be in this burnout right now because I wouldn't have pushed myself so hard past my limits. I wouldn't have hated myself so much. And I wouldn't have spent all my resources on masking that I could have used on other things, you know? Like, I feel incredibly disabled right now, even more than I do on a regular basis. I know it could have been avoided, and I know I'm not like an isolated case. Like, I know we're all in the same boat as late diagnosed autistic people. And when I say I feel angry, you know, about what I went through, it's a feeling that I share with all of you. But yeah, I don't know if it's the lack of sleep or just the Christmas approaching. Just I've had a lot of emotions lately, and I had a meltdown a few days ago, and then the following day I was like crying on the couch, basically saying everything I just said, but in a much more animated, anger fueled way, dumping all that in my partner's face. In the past, he would have been like, no, no, don't, you know, like, don't get so angry, la, la, la. And now he knows that he's just gonna let me speak because I just need to unload, like, verbally, obviously. Like, I'm not being like violent or anything like that. I just like it's a word vomit with lots of emotions, and it's intense in the moment, but I feel much better afterwards because I've expressed those emotions instead of keeping them locked in, you know? So yeah, I've been thinking about all that and having all those emotions, and I thought I'd share it. I'm trying to prepare for Christmas. Obviously, there's a lot when you're, especially when you're hosting. You've gotta, you know, you've gotta have food, you gotta have the place relatively clean, you gotta have the guest bedroom made up, like, you know, there's a lot of things you gotta take care of. Like, no one's putting pressure on me to do these things, but obviously, like, I don't want to welcome my in-laws in a dirty house where they have to put the sheets on the bed themselves, and like there's no food to eat, you know what I mean? Like there's a minimum of stuff you gotta do when you're hosting. And like, you know, my partner's really, you know, like he told me like you don't have to do any of that, stuff like that, but I don't know, maybe it's just a control thing. I mean, I know it's definitely a control thing. I don't let go very easily. I need to be in control of things. And also my partner, you know, my partner's ADHD, and he's had a lot of it on his mind lately. I mentioned that he got fired a while back, and obviously he's got that on his mind and stuff. And I don't have ADHD, so I'm not exactly 100% sure how it works, but he's been struggling more with his ADHD than usual. He's more forgetful. He struggles to regulate his attention more. I don't know if it's because he has less energy to mask his ADHD and like compensation techniques and stuff, and so his ADHD is more visible on the outside. I don't know, but so that adds another pressure for me because I feel like I need to be even more in charge because I know it that he's gonna forget things. So, but I'm trying to. We're really doing like the minimum. We're not gonna be cooking a whole lot. We're gonna buy as much. We're gonna buy like things that we can, like quick meals and stuff, like things that are pre-made. Like my in-laws already offered to cook for us. Like, you know, they're being really accommodating. So I'm trying to take some of that pressure off of myself, and like there's no like stakes, you know, like back when I still spent Christmas with my own family, like there were definitely stakes. Like, you know, those were the kinds of people like, you know, basically it was never good enough for them, and like there was a lot of expectations and stuff like that. There's none of that with my current family. They're very forgiving and tolerant, and they don't have like high expectations and stuff. Like they don't make a huge deal out of the holidays and stuff, like it's fine, you know, like there isn't a huge pressure. It's just I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I'm still working on not doing that, especially given the fact that I'm in burnout, which is why I would have preferred not to do Christmas with family this year, but it is what it is. I have 2 weeks left to prepare everything and rest. I spend less time in bed now. I spend more time downstairs, which means that I get more overstimulated because there's a lot more happening downstairs than, you know, upstairs, because there's like the kitchen, there's like the cats, but also I don't want to go back to like being in bed all the time. So I'm trying to find a balance, like I said in my last video, to get the rest that I need and the regulation that I need without being in bed all the time. It's tricky. I'm still figuring it out. And also, I've not been sleeping well, as I said, so that doesn't help. But yeah, I'm trying my best. It's survival, you know. The hardest thing for me is that it feels like I'm constantly uncomfortable, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, but like Irene from the Thought Spot said in one of her videos that neurotypicals, you know, often like seek happiness as their end goal in life, and she was saying how for neurodivergent people the end goal isn't necessarily happiness as much as just feeling regulated and comfortable in our own skins. And I thought that was so true. These days with burnout, I have to say, I rarely ever feel comfortable. I'm always either super tired, mentally drained, overstimulated, dysregulated. Like it takes a toll after a while. Like I'm really tired of it, but I know the only way to get out of it is to rest. And I struggle to give myself that rest sometimes. So that's a riddle I'm still trying to solve, you know. I looked back on the first video I ever made for this channel, which was, I actually posted it in late January, but I filmed it on the 14th of December 2023. In 3 days, it's going to be the 1 year anniversary of when I filmed my first video, and I was in a very similar setup with the Christmas tree and the TV, except it was the other way around. That's also why I wanted to make this video. It was kind of like an homage to my first video with the Christmas tree in the background, where I was talking about I suspected I was autistic and I was already in the process of getting a diagnosis, and I was kind of listing my autistic traits and stuff. So it was funny looking back on that, how far I've come since then, but also like I was surprised by how much stuff I had figured out already at that point. If I don't make another video before the end of 2024, I wanted to say thank you for this year on YouTube. Thank you for being here. I don't think I would still be making videos if it wasn't for your continued support and the comments. 2024 has been both a blessing and a curse, and I hope that 2025 brings us peace and comfort, because that's all we need as late diagnosed autistics, you know, to just be more in alignment with our own needs and wants, to have a more comfortable life. So that's my wish for you for 2025, in case I don't talk to you again before next year. And I hope you spend a good Christmas. I hope you'll be surrounded by loved ones, and that they'll be understanding, and that you'll be able to listen to your own needs, and that you won't get too overwhelmed. Thanks for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.